Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a drawing of a German Shepherd, and I'm going to use colored pencils on sandpaper. I already have a simple sketch in place that I created by tracing. The paper I'm going to be working on is 1000 grit sandpaper. It's a wet to dry sanding paper that you can buy in a hardware store. The size is about 9 times 11 inches. And the pencils I'm going to be using are Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils. The reference is in the description as usual, and I'm starting with a burnt ochre pencil. And if you look at the reference, you will see that I often put the burnt ochre in places where you don't really see it, but that's because I'm using it as a base color. I want it to be a base color and also to influence the layers that I will put on top of it a bit later. So here around the edge I'm putting some grayish color, light gray color, and then some brown, like a burnt umber, here in the darker side of the ear. The edge on the right is catching a bit of light from the other side. And a little bit of black colored pencil for some of the darker details on this middle part of the ear. There are some shadow areas here as well as some darker hairs. So for that I'm going to use a black colored pencil and just work on top of that with lighter ones. Don't be surprised that this is my approach, because if you've watched my videos with colored pencils on sandpaper before, you know that on this surface it's very easy to layer colored pencils. You can easily work from light to dark and from dark to light. Right now I'm using the ivory colored pencil to work on top of the layers that I already put down, and here I'm using a light gray and a mid-tone gray, because the middle part of the ear, the opening of the ear, is kind of grayish. It has some grayish, lighter, softer, fluffier hair, a little bit longer hair covering the opening of the ear. And around the edge I'm using this ivory colored pencil, which is like a yellowish white, one of the lightest pencils that I have. On the middle part I'm mostly using some grayish tones in a combination with some darker, slightly darker tones such as black and brown for some of the darker details. If I feel like the color is a little bit too dull in some places, I just use a little bit of orangey color, like a sanguine or something like that. So the edge of the ear, because it's more exposed to the light source, is catching more light. This inner part is a little bit darker, so I'm going over it one more time with a black and a brown. Basically I want to try to make the ear look three-dimensional, and every now and then I go over it with some lighter hairs to create that texture of fur. And I can do that because, like I said, this surface allows me to do that, because I can layer very clean marks with a lighter pencil on top of the darker layers. Anyway, I'm starting to work on the nose. This is one of the darkest details in this dog portrait, especially this side of the nose, which is facing down, the nostril area as well. It's all going to be almost completely black, so I'm just going to do that with a black colored pencil and then gradually make a transition towards the lighter gray areas at the top. At the top it's a lighter gray because that part of the nose is facing up, it's exposed to the light source, but at the same time it's also a relatively smooth, shiny area, or a reflective area I suppose, and there are some dots here. I'm trying to imitate the appearance of that surface. I used a little bit of lighter gray and now a few touches of white pencil as well, because I want that tip of the nose to have a few of those highlights, and that'll make it look round and more three-dimensional. I don't want to overdo it with those lightest details. For the details that are light but not too bright, I can use lighter grays, like a light cool gray or a light warm gray. I have a very nice range of grays with my Faber-Castell Polychromos. So here I'm working my way down the snout area, and the lower part of it, the part that is just above the upper jaw area, is going to be covered with darker fur, and the gums themselves are dark as well. But the upper part of the snout, which is exposed to the light source, is going to be lighter, like again a lighter greyish color. Moving on to the eye, I'm kind of skipping from one part of the head to the other, and that's because I'm just going where I feel like at the moment. The eyes are probably the most important and the most engaging part of the portrait, and also people like to draw them because I don't think they're too complex, but at the same time they're fun to draw. And when you draw the eye at the very beginning or very close to the beginning of the drawing of your portrait, it can be very motivating when you have a nice looking detail at the very beginning, and then it's easier to move on to some of the other parts which are maybe a little bit less interesting and a bit more repetitive, which in this case will be the fur. So for the eye, first I drew the darker details, like that eyebrow area and the darker skin around the eye, and then and of course the pupil, and then I drew the iris with a combination of some ochre and burnt sienna, some reddish brownish tones, and now I'm drawing the catchlight. For the catchlight I used the light grey and a touch of white. I used a light grey, and then I used a little bit of white in the brightest part of that catchlight, that reflection in the eye, and that kind of makes the eye look more like a round, smooth, reflective object, or a reflective surface rather. Anyway, I'm moving on to the rest of the fur here in the forehead area, and using the burnt ochre as a base color, and then every now and then adding a little bit of darker value or darker details with walnut brown and some other darker browns. For the darker browns I will mostly use either walnut brown or a burnt umber or a burnt sienna. I will use burnt sienna a lot because burnt sienna is reddish brown, which I think goes well with this burnt ochre. Burnt ochre is lighter and a bit more yellowish, and burnt sienna is a bit darker and a bit more reddish. So I think these two go well together, and I can make transitions from the lighter, more yellowish fur to the darker, more brownish and reddish fur where needed. And of course, in addition to all of that, I will be using a black pencil as well for the darkest bits. I have no problem using a black pencil on this surface because it blends so easily, and I can easily modify the black color with some other tones just by layering lighter colors on top of it. Here I'm using a light beige red. A light beige red is a very light beige reddish color which goes well on top of this burnt ochre to create some lighter details on the fur. The reason why I like this combination is because unlike the ivory colored pencil, it's a little bit warmer and it's not quite as bright, so I will tend to reserve the ivory colored pencil for the brightest parts of the fur, which are like a very light yellowish color, or that's the way they appear to us. But for the most part, for the lighter fur, I will be using that light beige red, which won't appear as pinkish when I put it on top of the burnt ochre. So even though you can layer on this surface, and even though you can make clean marks, depending on how you use the pencil or how you apply it, it is still influenced by the layer underneath to a certain degree. Moving on to the snout area, where I'm now using a cool grey to shade the upper part of the snout. which is more exposed to the light because the light source is coming from above. It's also coming a little bit more from the left. That's not particularly important here, because what's more important is that I need to shade the snout so that the upper part is lighter and the lower part is almost completely black. I'm going to use a lot of black pencil here on the lower part of the snout, and then blend that a little bit with a brush, because on this surface you can move the pigment around more easily than you can on regular paper with colored pencils. And once I have that darker area, I'm going to refine it by adding some lighter details here and there, mostly with grays, either with mid-tone grays or lighter grays. I can add tiny hairs and some other tiny details, and I can work back and forth with a black colored pencil and gray pencils to add that texture of the fur, to make a nice transition from the shadow area onto the lighter area at the top. I want to use a little bit more of the cool gray here, because I think that these grayish areas appear cooler in the reference. And you can see how I'm making these tiny short marks to indicate that this part of the snout is covered with really short fur. You always have to pay attention to the length of the fur on the animal, because the length of the fur varies in different parts of the body, so you want to match the length of the fur with the length of your pencil strokes. Finally, I'm adding a few touches of blue here and there. I used some light ultramarine and now ultramarine color to add a bluish tone to some parts of the snout, because I think that this bluish color will make for a nice contrast with the more orangey parts of the fur on this German Shepherd. I'm adding some of these tiny dots on around the nose where these whiskers grow out of, and then on top I'm going to add a little bit of light beige just to make that part of the snout stand out against the background. So I'm always trying to enhance that contrast between the background and the main subject. Sometimes the main subject or some parts of the main subject's body are lighter than the background, sometimes they're darker. Here and there I add a touch of orange. I have to use that sparingly just to make the colors a bit more vibrant, because what happens when I draw this fur, if I use a little bit too much of the beige or a little bit too much of the ivory, the fur can end up looking a little bit dull. This is especially the case because the background color of my paper is a dull grayish color, so I always have to pay attention to that. The colors are going to be influenced by the background color of my paper, so if I feel like the main subject looks a little bit too dull, I can always go back in and revise or rework some of the areas and add a little bit more of those vibrant colors to them. I'm doing some work on the other ear, and first I lay down the base color around the edge using the burnt ochre, and then moving in with some browns and even some black colored pencil. I also used a little bit of that burnt sienna, and after that I'm gonna add some lighter details with a light beige. So you can see that my method when working on this surface for the most part is working from dark to light. This is I think the complete opposite of what you would do if you were to work on regular paper with colored pencils, because you really can't do that on regular paper. On regular paper you have to work from light to dark, building up the colors and the values gradually. What I often do on this surface is I just start with a darker color and I put lighter details on top of that, because this surface allows me to do that, and I also think it's a more natural way to work. Because if you think about it, the shadow areas are deeper down in the fur and the lighter fur is sitting on top, so it feels more natural to pull lighter strokes on top of the darker ones. Doing this middle part of the ear, which is a little bit grayish, so I'm going to use that background color of the paper to a certain extent, and then layer some other colors on top of that, mostly beige and a touch of ivory colored pencil. I occasionally do a little bit of blending either with a Tortillion or with a brush, but I tend to use that sparingly because most of the time I prefer to layer. Why not use the opportunity that the surface of the paper is giving you? Anyway, the ear is coming along nicely, and once I do that, I will be focusing on the cheekbone area here, adding some short fur, really short fur, first with a base color, and then some darker details, and then some lighter details with a light gray and a light beige red. I have to address another issue because a lot of people often ask me in the comments which exact colors I'm using. Like, they want me to list the exact names of colors and the exact numbers of colors. I really can't be bothered to do that, and after all, I do tell you which color I'm using at that particular moment. I'm describing the color to you or telling you what the name of the color is. But the thing is that, like I said, I can't be bothered to write them down. It's no fun at all, and I don't really keep track of these things. And the second thing is that different people use different brands, and different brands have different ranges of colors. They have different names, different designations. So just use whatever you feel is similar to what you're trying to achieve. I just try to eyeball it, both in terms of value and in terms of color. So, for example, look at the tongue area here. I started with a little bit of this light magenta because it seemed close to the target color, but then I realized it's a little bit too dark. I added a little bit of that pinkish salmon color, and then I realized I just have to put some white on top of it. I put some white color pencil on top of it, and then I just blended with a Tortillion. I realized that it's getting a lot closer to what it's supposed to look like, and then I added a little bit more white colored pencil because I saw that in the reference photo the tongue appears very light because it's exposed to the light source, and it's a very light color, very light value. So once I applied the white pencil a few times, it got to where it's really close to what I see in the reference. So here for the teeth, I used some light gray, and it's important not to use white because white is too bright, but the light grays are a little bit more subdued in terms of value, but still light enough to create the contrast. And for the teeth that are further back in the jaw, which are less exposed to the light, you have to make them a little bit darker by using a mid-tone gray, or maybe even shading over them with some darker colors. For the gums, I also again experimented with a couple of different colors. I tried a little bit of magenta, a little bit of burnt sienna and stuff like that, and a little bit of black colored pencil as well. So it's not like I know exactly what I'm going to use, and even when I'm done, it's usually a combination of colors, and I just stop layering them and blending them once I'm happy with the color I've achieved. And sometimes I will know exactly how I got to that point. Sometimes the path will be a little bit more complicated. So I'm just trying to approximate, and it's not going to be perfect. And my suggestion is not to worry about it. If you're trying to replicate this to achieve a similar result, don't worry about exact colors. Just go with whatever feels right at the moment. The lights, the colors, or the way we see them, our perception of them changes depending on the lighting and other things, so it doesn't have to be 100% accurate or exactly the same as the reference photo. If you're paying too much attention to the reference photo, it's not going to be fun, it's going to take too much time, and it's going to be very constraining. And this way, when you just use the reference as a loose guide, it's much more fun to draw, even when you're drawing a detailed subject such as this one. And I think that this is a detailed subject because there's lots of this short fur and there's a lot of variation in the fur. So I'm not going to try to place every single hair where it is exactly in the reference. Rather, I'm just going to look at the reference and see, okay, in this part of the head we have some lighter fur, in this one we have some darker fur. So that's basically what I'm going to try to replicate. And the same goes with the length of the fur. It can't be exactly the same, but as long as it's more or less similar, it's going to look like the animal that you're trying to draw. This is not a human portrait, so we don't need that level of precision. I did the cheek area, added some lighter details with an ivory colored pencil, and now I'm moving on to the side of the head here, where we have some longer fur. And I first put down some burnt ochre and then layered some light beige on top of that, and for the lightest bits again I use the ivory colored pencil. I'm going to move on to the gums and this part of the mouth here. The mouth is half open with the tongue exposed to the light source. I've already done the tongue, I'm not going to add any more details to it. So I first lay down the base color for the gums, which appear kind of reddish here to me, but it's a duller color. And then we have these highlights on them because it's a smooth, wet, reflective area. And these tiny highlights stand out really nicely against that darker background, but here you can see how I can make really clean marks with a colored pencil on top of the darker layer underneath. Very clean edge if I want to. And also I can make slightly blurrier marks just by using less pressure or controlling the angle at which I'm holding the pencil. So you can play around with that, you have a lot of options, but the most important thing is that you're able to put lighter details on top of the darker ones. And you can draw some very detailed portraits of animals, whether they are domestic animals or wildlife. You've probably seen a lot of videos like these, but where people work with pastel pencils on high quality artist's papers like Pastel Matte and some others. But on this sandpaper that you can buy in a hardware store, you can really create some super detailed, very realistic looking drawings with colored pencils. And colored pencils, in my opinion, are better than pastels because you don't have to fix them. They already have binder in them, so they don't really smudge that much at all. I mean, I can touch this with my finger and it wouldn't smudge much. I don't even have to fix it. In fact, I think I usually fix it very lightly, but I don't even have to fix it because it won't smudge. If you sell it or transport it, it won't smudge at all. And if you fix it too much, if you put too much fixative, it's going to get a little bit darker, so you don't really want that. But with pastels, it's very difficult to fix them, and they're never really fixed, and if you try to fix them a little bit better, they just get darker and they look nothing like when you completed the drawing, so that's really bad. But with color pencils, you can just have these super detailed drawings and not worry about smudging. So I started working on the neck there. As you can see, I put down some burnt ochre first on the other side of the neck here, and on the back we're going to have some darker fur. I'm going to use a black colored pencil for that first, and then I'm going to put some other colors on top of that. But let me get back to what I started talking about, the neck. So I started with the burnt ochre, and then I used some lighter colors, the usual ones that I used for the lighter fur, the light beige, and then some ivory. And for that part of the neck, on the throat area, I used a little bit of darker color. I used some black pencil, and I used some burnt sienna, because the jaw area is casting a bit of shadow onto that part of the neck, and it's kind of like a warm shadow, so it needs to be a little bit darker, and I thought that the reddish brown would be good for that. And here I'm using some gray, lighter gray, as a transition from this darker fur onto that lighter fur on the upper part of the back and the neck. And I even added a touch of blue around the edge of that area, because I want that grayish area to have a bit of a bluish color. So I mostly used a combination of light cool gray, or a mid-tone cool gray, and some bluish color on top of the black. Like I said, I'm using the bluish colors here and there to create some contrast with the orangey tones, because I think it's important to have a contrast, not just in terms of values, but also in terms of the complementary colors, where you have the option to create it, because that'll create a much better looking subject, much more vibrant colors, better looking colors on your main subject. I said main subject, but it's not like there's anything else in this portrait, because it's a vignette and there is no background. So I'm just going to finish it like a vignette. I'm going to fade the lower part of the portrait like I often do with my human portraits. And I think I like vignettes. I think they are perfect for portraits, whether they are portraits of people or animals, and they make for a very nice balanced composition, and they just give you the freedom to omit the stuff that you just don't want to draw, either because you don't feel like it or because you feel like it doesn't add anything to the portrait. So here I omitted the background entirely. Maybe I could have added a little bit of background, but I didn't really feel like doing that. I think that the animal stands out very nicely against this grayish background, and as long as I can create contrast, nice contrast between the main subject and the background, I think that it will pop out of that background and look very three-dimensional, and it will be a very nice portrait. Anyway, on the neck I'm adding some darker details with a burnt sienna, just some darker details on the fur, reddish brown details, and then on top of that I'm adding some highlights with lighter pencils. Here I'm using the ivory because I see some very light parts of the fur, and then I'm switching back to the light beige red. So I'm switching between these two, where I use the light beige most of the time to layer that fur to make it look more detailed, to give it some depth, because basically I'm layering light marks on top of the darker ones to make it look like these lighter clumps of fur are sitting on top of the darker ones, which are deeper in the fur, deeper in the shadow. And here on the neck, in some parts, I'm mostly following the direction of the fur. That's another thing that you need to pay attention to when you're drawing fur. You need to pay attention to the direction in which you're pulling your pencil strokes, not just the length. But here on some parts of the neck you will see that because the neck is a part of the body which bends and twists a lot, there will be a lot of folds in the skin, but the fur as well, because the fur follows the movement and the shape of the skin. So the hair will be pointing every which way. There will be a lot of overlapping. The hair will be pointing in different directions. So I try to imitate that with the direction of my pencil strokes, and I try to overlap some of these lighter marks to make the fur look more random and more realistic. Now I'm putting down the finishing touches by adding some lighter marks here and there where I felt that the fur needed to be made a bit lighter, and I'm also putting down some finishing touches by adding a touch of blue in those cooler areas, and I'm actually going to do the same thing with those warmer parts of the fur by using the sanguine, which is like an orangey color, just to make some parts of that orangey or brownish fur a little bit more vibrant, and to enhance that contrast between these two colors, the bluish and the orangey tones. And once I do that, I'm pretty much finished with the portrait. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I have plenty of drawings of animals, both in colored pencil and in other media. Consider subscribing if you want to. Give me a like, comment, let me know what you think. And I'm just doing a little bit of cleaning up with kneaded eraser, just a bit of cleaning up here and there. Some of these bits of pencil kind of stick to this surface, so I need to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to put my signature here on the left side. So if you want to see longer videos and much more content, if you want to see full-length narrated videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.